Greetings everyone. Welcome to CEC Gurukul lectures. I am Mehak Chawla, art educator, Bharatnatyam dancer and disciple of Guru Srimati Geeta Chandranji. In this lecture, we are going to study about Bhakti and various religious movements and their influence on different representative aspects of culture with focus on dance and theatre. So, Indian culture is a living continuum shaped by an intricate interaction between religion, philosophy, society and artistic expression. Among the various forces that have guided this cultural evolution, religious movements, particularly the Bhakti movement, have played a pivotal role in shaping the ethos, aesthetics and function of Indian performing arts, especially dance and theatre. In the Indian tradition, art has never existed in isolation as a decorative or entertainment oriented activity. Rather, it has functioned as a sacred medium of communication between the human and the divine, between the individual and society. From the earliest Vedic rituals to the emotionally charged devotional expression of the medieval Bhakti saint, religion has provided both thematic content and philosophical grounding to artistic practices. Dance and theatre emerged as embodied forms of worships, modes of storytelling, and instruments of ethical and spiritual instruction. This idea is clearly articulated in Bharata's Natya Shastra, which defines Natya as Pancham Ved, created to educate, entertain and elevate society across Varnas. Thus, performance in India carries a dual responsibility: aesthetic refinement and spiritual transmission. The Bhakti movement marked a significant shift in the cultural and religious landscapes of India. It emphasized personal devotion, emotional surrender, and accessibility of the divine, challenging rigid ritualism and social hierarchies. This movement profoundly influenced literature, music, visual arts, and most importantly, dance and theatre by introducing vernacular languages, emotionally rich narratives, and relatable devotional themes. The performer was no longer merely an artist but a bhakta, and performance itself became an act of devotion. Alongside Bhakti, other religious and philosophical movements such as Vedic ritualism, Buddhism, Jainism, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Shaktism and Sufism contributed distinct worldviews and aesthetic sensibilities that shaped regional and classical performance tradition. Shaivism conceptualized dance as a cosmic principle through the image of Nataraja. Vaishnavism developed the idea of līlā, influencing narrative dance dramas. Shaktism emphasized the dynamic feminine principle, enriching lasya traditions, while Sufism introduced notions of divine love and ecstasy, impacting music and movement in Indo-Islamic performance cultures. In this lecture, we will study how Bhakti and various movements influence representative aspect of Indian culture, with a focused analysis on dance and theatre as expressive, ritualistic and social forms. By tracing philosophical ideas, historical development and artistic manifestations, students will gain an understanding of how Indian performing art function as repositories of devotion, cultural memory and socio-spiritual values. Such an understanding is essential not only for academic study but also for appreciating Indian dance and theatre as living traditions rooted in centuries of religious and cultural dialogue. The concept of bhakti occupies a central position in Indian religious and philosophical and cultural thought. Etymologically, the term bhakti is derived from the Sanskrit root bhaj, which conveys multiple interconnected meanings such as to share, to adore, and to participate. These meanings together suggest an active and participatory relationship between the devotee and the divine, rather than a distant or abstract form of worship. Bhakti, therefore, signifies a deeply personal, emotional, and loving bond with God, where devotion becomes a lived experience rather than a prescribed ritual. Unlike ritualistic practices that emphasize external observance, bhakti stresses inner feelings and emotional involvement, making spiritual practice accessible and intimate. At a philosophical level, bhakti represents a significant shift from ritual-centric and purely intellectual religious system to a path grounded in emotion and surrender. Central to bhakti philosophy is the belief that personal devotion is superior to ritual formalism and that the divine can be approached through love rather than fear or obligation. This philosophy rejects rigid social hierarchies, asserting the equality of all devotees before God, irrespective of caste, gender, or social status. Such an inclusive vision had far-reaching implications for Indian society and culture, allowing artistic expression, especially through dance, music, and theatre, to become a shared spiritual language across communities. Another defining feature of bhakti philosophy is the emphasis on emotional surrender, sharanagati, where the devotee places complete trust in the divine will. This surrender is not passive but deeply emotional, marked by humility, longing, love, and devotion. The philosophical focus on bhava made bhakti particularly compatible with the performing arts, as dance and theatre are inherently expressive and emotion-driven forms. Through gestures, facial expressions, music, and narrative, performers could embody devotion and communicate complex spiritual states in a form that was immediately perceptible to the audience. The Bhakti movement also played a crucial role in transforming the language and medium of spiritual expression by encouraging the use of vernacular languages instead of Sanskrit. Bhakti saints ensured that devotional ideas could reach the masses. Poetry, music, and performance became primary vehicles for transmitting spiritual philosophy, enabling dance and theatre to function as means of religious education, emotional expression, and collective devotion. Storytelling traditions, devotional songs, and dramatic enactment thus became central to the lived practice of bhakti. The philosophical foundations of bhakti are articulated in several important textual sources that continue to influence Indian performing arts. The Bhagavad Gita presents Bhakti Yoga as one of the principal paths to liberation, emphasizing devotion as a universal and accessible spiritual discipline. The Bhagavad Puran elaborates devotional narrative, particularly centered to Vishnu and Krishna, which later became central themes in dance and theatre tradition. The Narada Bhakti Sutras systematize Bhakti as a philosophical doctrine based on love and surrender, while Jayadev Gita Govinda exemplifies the aesthetic and emotional dimensions of Bhakti, becoming a foundational text for expressive dance forms. From the philosophical foundation of Bhakti, we now move towards understanding how Bhakti developed as a historical movement across different regions of India. The Bhakti movement did not emerge suddenly as an isolated religious phenomenon. Rather, it developed gradually through earlier philosophical traditions and scriptural thought in India. Its earliest roots can be traced to the Upanishadic emphasis on inner realization and personal spiritual experience, where the focus shifted from external ritual to internal understanding of the self and the absolute. This inward looking approach laid the groundwork for bhakti by privileging personal connection and experiential knowledge over formal ritualism. So I begin with South India first. So in the South Indian Bhakti movement marks the earliest organized expression of Bhakti as a mass devotional movement in India. The formative phase was led by two prominent groups of saint poets, the Āḻvārs, devoted to Vishnu, and the Nāyaṉārs, devoted to Shiva. The Āḻvārs were 12 in number, notably including the woman saint Andal, whose devotional poetry occupies a unique place in Bhakti literature. The Nāyaṉārs were 63 in number and included the woman saint Karaikal Ammiyar, whose intense devotional expression is both poetic and performative in nature. These saint poets composed deeply emotional hymns in Tamil rather than Sanskrit, thereby making spiritual expression accessible to the common people and marking a significant shift towards vernacular religiosity. The hymns of the Āḻvārs were later compiled as the Divya Prabandham, a revered collection of 4,000 Tamil verses, where the hymns of the Nāyaṉārs were compiled as Tevarams. These compositions were not merely literary texts but were intended to be sung, recited, and enacted within temple spaces, encouraging collective participation. Consequently, music, movement, and expressive storytelling became integral to temple worship, transforming temples into dynamic cultural centers where devotion, performance, and community life converged. This synthesis laid a crucial foundation for the later development of classical dance and music traditions, deeply rooted in Bhakti ideology. While South India provided the earliest organized form of Bhakti, the movement later spread and diversified across North India. The North Indian Bhakti movement expanded the scope and diversity of Bhakti philosophy and practice. This phase was characterized by a wide range of saint poets such as Kabir, Mirabai, Surdas, Tulsidas, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who articulated devotion through poetry, song, and public performance. In North Indian Bhakti included both Saguna Bhakti, which is focused on devotion to a personal deity such as Krishna or Rama, and Nirguna Bhakti, which emphasized devotion to a formless, abstract divine principle. The teachings and compositions of these saints deeply influenced folk and classical performance traditions as devotional songs, narrative enactments, and dance dramas became central to religious and cultural life. Traditions such as Ras Leela and Ram Leela, along with Bhakti infused musical and dance practices, transformed performance into a collective devotional experience, reinforcing Bhakti as both a spiritual and cultural movement. Having studied the historical development of the Bhakti movement, we now study how Bhakti shaped other religious movements influencing Indian culture and performance tradition. Indian culture and performance traditions find their earliest foundation in the Vedic and Brahminical worldview, where ritual was central to both religious and social life. The Vedic tradition emphasized yajna as a means of cosmic balance, and these rituals were inherently performative in nature, involving structured movement, gesture, chant, and music. The Samved, in particular, they laid the musical foundation of Indian performance through its melodic chanting, which later evolved into systematic musical forms. These ritualistic practices gradually developed proto-theatrical elements such as role division, spatial arrangements, symbolic action, and audience participation. This ritual performance continuum eventually crystallized into the formal theory of drama as codified in Bharata's Natya Shastra, where Natya is described as fifth Ved, the Panchaved, which is accessible to all sections of society regardless of caste and gender. Thus, Vedic ritual not only shaped religious practice but also laid the philosophical and aesthetic groundwork for Indian dance and theatre traditions. From ritual and chant rooted in the Vedic worldview, Indian performance traditions gradually absorbed ethical and narrative dimensions, leading us to the influence of Buddhism. Buddhism introduced a profound ethical and philosophical shift in Indian cultural expression by emphasizing compassion, non-violence, impermanence, and disciplined living. Rejecting elaborate ritualism, Buddhism promoted experiential wisdom and moral conduct, which significantly influenced artistic and performative expression. The Jatka tales narrating the previous births of the Buddha became rich narrative material for dance, theatre, storytelling, and visual arts. These stories, filled with moral lessons and emotional depth, were adapted into performative formats using gestures, symbols, expressive narration, and character-based storytelling. Buddhist monasteries functioned as important cultural centers that supported storytelling traditions, mass performances, and ritual enactments. The influence of Buddhism is also visible in sculptural and moral traditions, particularly at sites like Ajanta, where dance-like postures and expressive hand gestures inform later Abhinaya practices. Thus, Buddhism enriched Indian performance traditions with ethical content, narrative clarity, and visual symbolism. Alongside Buddhist ideals of compassion and narrative ethics, Jainism contributed another dimension: discipline, restraint, and moral didacticism. Jainism exerted a subtle but significant influence on Indian cultural and performance traditions through its strict emphasis on self-discipline, non-violence, restraint and moral purity. Unlike the emotionally expressive Bhakti traditions, Jain narratives are marked by restraint and didactic intent. Jain religious storytelling often focused on moral exemplars, renunciation, and ethical dilemmas, which were communicated through controlled narration, symbolic gestures, and minimalistic performance. These narratives influenced regional folk theatre forms and temple storytelling tradition, particularly in Western India. The performative aesthetics associated with Jainism favored clarity of message over emotional excess, thereby contributing to the development of didactic theatre and narrative dance forms. Jain influence thus reinforced the moral and instructional role of performance within Indian cultural life. From ethical restraint and discipline, Indian performance traditions moved towards devotional intensity and cosmic symbolism through Shaivism. Shaivism occupies a central position in the history of Indian dance and theatre due to its profound symbolic association between divinity and movement. Shiva, revered as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, embodies the philosophical idea that creation, preservation, and destruction are rhythmic processes. The Tandava dance of Shiva represent cosmic dynamism, while its aesthetic representation deeply influenced classical dance vocabulary, posture, and symbolism. Shiva temple ritual incorporated dance as an offering, integrating performance into daily worship and festival practices. Iconography of Shiva's dance provided a visual grammar for movement, influencing both theoretical and practical aspects of dance tradition. Shaivism thus elevated dance form from a ritual act to a metaphysical principle where movement itself becomes a manifestation of cosmic truth. From cosmic movement and divine rhythm, we will move further in our next lecture. Thank you.